Good evening and welcome to the Bridgman Teen and Tween Cook-Off. Joining us today is Mary Spencer. Mary is a very accomplished cook. She has studied under some of the greats and is an absolute treasure both to our library and Michigan in general. Mary, thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you everybody for joining. So today we are going to make some stuffed chicken breast. And it kind of is a little bit different than just regular chicken breast. We're gonna stuff them. I'm gonna show you how to fillet them, to stuff them. I'm gonna show you how to saute them, and then we're gonna bake them in the oven. So kind of an easy recipe, but it involves a few techniques. So one of the first things I wanted to talk to you guys about is basically food safety in the kitchen. So I have an enormous chicken breast here, and you don't have to have one as big as this, but sometimes that's what you end up with, is just a really big one. But this is basically half of a chicken breast, because when you think of a whole chicken breast, it's both sides. But I am going to actually put this on I don't like to use wooden cutting boards when I'm working with chicken, because wood has a tendency to absorb the chicken juices. So usually I use something like plastic or something like that I can wash, and I can wash it in the dishwasher. One of the things you never want to do with chicken when you're working with it, two things. One of the big catchwords is cross-contamination. So one of the things you never want to do is wash chicken in your sink, because when you wash your chicken under the faucet, what happens is you're splashing all the chicken juices all over your sink, and it is contaminating all of your kitchen sink. So instead of doing that, when you actually cook chicken, you always cook chicken so that it ends up being about 165 degrees to 170 internal temperature. And so you never serve chicken undercooked, you never serve it raw. So washing it before you cook it really does nothing to the chicken. And the heat in the oven or on the barbecue or however you're going to cook it is going to kill anything that's on that chicken. So don't worry about washing it. The other thing is, once you've touched it, once you've contaminated your surface, you always want to make sure that you wash your hands, wash things after the raw chicken has touched it. You can wear gloves if you want, but washing your hands with soap and water afterwards is perfect as well. So one of the things I like to do when I'm using chicken breast, or when I get it from the stores, I like to trim it. You're going to see some of this fat on here, some of the sinew. I like to just remove that, because sometimes they just kind of cut it haphazardly and in the store, and they don't worry about trimming it really, really well. I don't like to have any of that fattiness on it, because I just think that it doesn't add anything to the chicken. Any little stray pieces, I just trim that off, and and then we go from there. So it's a little bit of a more more tidier looking chicken. It looks a little bit nicer. It doesn't look as messy. So when I'm stuffing a chicken breast, there's two things you can actually do. One of them would be to pound the chicken out so that it's really flat, and then you can put your stuffing in the middle and you can roll it. The other way to do it, which is the way we're going to do it, because I think it's just a little easier and less messy and less time consuming, is to cut a pocket in the chicken breast. And to do that, when you look at a chicken breast, I'm going to show this to you guys right now, but when you're looking at it, this part of the chicken breast where it's kind of curved on one side is a lot fatter than this part. So this is the part you want to work with, that kind of that fattier side. So basically what I'm going to do is have that fattier side pointing to the side of my where I would use my knife, and make sure that your knives are sharp. A dull knife is a knife that you're going to hurt yourself with. A sharp knife is a little bit easier to deal with, and it's a little safer as far as knives are concerned. So when I take this, I'm just kind of showing this to you, but I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to rest my hand right on top of that chicken breast, okay, so that my hand is parallel to the board or to whatever the chicken is on, and then the knife is parallel to the board as well. So what I do is I take my knife, and right in the middle of that, I start slicing a pocket into the chicken breast. Now, I don't want to go all the way through, because if I go to the other side, all your filling is going to leak out and it's going to be a mess in the oven. I mean, it'll still work, but just be careful that you don't do that. So now I am cutting a pocket in the chicken breast, and then you can actually feel where your knife is as you're slicing it with your hand on top. So I can feel that it is right there, almost at the end. So I stop cutting it there, and then I'm going to just take and kind of cut a little slit in this part of it. And you want to make sure that your knife is pretty parallel to the board, so that if it's angled downwards, it's going to make a slice into the chicken, so that the chicken, at the end of the day, you're going to end up with pieces of chicken that's going to have a big slice in it, or a big cut in it that goes down to the bottom. And again, you're going to have problems with your filling leaking out the bottom of the chicken. So now at this point, I have a beautiful pocket. You guys can see that. I could keep going if I wanted to, but I think it's pretty good here as far as size of the pocket. And the size of the chicken breast is going to be determined, or is going to determine how long you actually cook the chicken breast. So now at this point, I'm done with my knife. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my chicken breast and I'm going to put it on a sheet pan. Okay, so I have a sheet pan. When I do something like this, I always try to cover it with foil or grease the sheet pan, because if your cheese or your filling starts oozing out on the sheet pan, you're going to have a heck of a time cleaning up after yourself. So if I line it with foil or I oil it a little bit, that cheese won't stick as hard, and then you end up with a better time trying to clean up after yourself. Okay, so we'll put this aside for 1 second. We're going to make our filling that we're going to use for the chicken, and I'm going to flip my board real quick. And because I don't want to use the side that the chicken was on. Okay, I want to use the other side because it's clean. And I'm going to wash my hand real quick, because I just want to make sure that I don't cross-contaminate. I should grab another towel. Sorry, guys. Grab another towel here. And basically, I'm going to use some fresh broccoli. I like to use fresh ingredients when I can, just because I think, fresh always tastes better. And, for one chicken breast, you really don't need a lot of broccoli. And I think even what I have here is way too much. So we're just going to do about that many, maybe a little. This is called a floret. So if you cut the broccoli off of the stem, you end up with what's called a floret. And it's part of the stem and part of the broccoli, kind of the flower. Okay. And basically what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to cut that part of the stem off, because that could be kind of chewy at times. So I'm not going to use that on both of these. And what I'm going to do is cut this in half, and then cut this in half again. Okay, so that I end up with kind of like quarters. So you see I end up with like little quarter florets. And I'll throw this into my bowl, and I have some cheddar cheese in the bowl. Your recipe, if you follow the recipe with your amounts, you'll do absolutely perfectly. So I have my florets in here, and we're going to cut one more just so that I have enough. When I stuff something like this, I want to make sure that I have, a good amount, so that it isn't, then you end up with just chicken and no broccoli in it. And that's not quite, that's not quite as good as having a nicely stuffed chicken breast. So throw that out, not throw it out, but wash it, because it is now contaminated. So just make sure that anything that touched the chicken, is gone, maybe washed or done whatever you need to do with it, because you just don't want that to touch your broccoli or to touch other things. I have some mayonnaise. This is just regular mayonnaise, and it's going to act kind of like a glue to my filling here. So I've got my chicken breast, my cheese and my broccoli, and we're just going to kind of mix this together, and it is going to kind of hold this together so that when I stuff it, it won't like just fly out of my chicken breast. Okay, if you find that the amount of mayonnaise that is in the recipe is not enough, then add a little bit more. It's not a big deal. Sometimes broccoli florets are a little bit bigger. You may want to add a little bit more. All right, so now we'll switch back to our chicken breast. And one of the most important parts of cooking is seasoning. Seasoning is probably the most important part of cooking. And The most important seasoning is salt. So you really should make sure that you always salt your food really well. And I always salt with loose salt with my fingers, because I know when it goes through my fingers how much salt actually lands on the food. If you use a salt shaker, sometimes you pour too much and it flows kind of freely, and you end up using way too much salt. So I always salt with my fingers. I'm going to season all parts of the chicken, and you're going to season pretty generously, okay? I'm going to season the inside, and we'll flip this over and season the outside too, the other side of it. Make sure that you season both sides. All right, that's really super important. I'm going to use some black pepper here. The same thing I do with the black pepper. You can use a pepper grinder, but you know, you can do it the same way you would with the salt as well. The inside and the outside. All right, same thing. So season it with pepper. And then the other parts of seasoning is really what you want it to taste like. And for this, I'm going to use some garlic powder, and I'm going to use a little paprika. Paprika is essentially a roasted pepper that they dry and they grind so that it becomes a powder. And it's not spicy. It just has a lot of that kind of like that red pepper flavor. It's typically Hungarian in origin, but it goes really well with chicken. Garlic powder, because if I use fresh garlic, when I saute it, the fresh garlic may burn. So by using garlic powder, I'm not going to allow that garlic to burn. It's going to have that garlic taste, but not that burn garlic taste, okay? So I'm going to season with the garlic powder and paprika. And if you wanted to, you could just mix your salt in here too with your, you know, with your other seasonings, and you could the pepper as well. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to do this all separate, you know, it can however you want to, but I just wanted to make sure you guys were seeing what I was doing here as far as the seasoning. All right, so there is my seasoned chicken breast again. Now here I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start to stuff this. And basically what I want to do is I want to make sure that there's enough stuffing in here, like I said before, that it won't fall out. So here I've got, I'm going to open up my chicken breast, just open up that that cavity that I made. We're going to start putting our broccoli in here. All right. So we're going to just kind of shove it in there just like that. No, nothing fancy, guys. This is just kind of, you know, getting it in there so that it you know, you get enough in here so that when you actually eat the chicken breast, you're going to taste some of that stuffing with all the parts of the chicken that you actually eat. Okay, so here now at this point, I'm going to take the other flap and I'm just going to cover that just like this. Now, if you have issues with it opening, or you're having a hard time keeping it closed, you can take a toothpick and you can just spear it with a toothpick and it will keep it closed for you. But you know, if you're kind of careful, you really don't have to do that, but we'll take a toothpick and we'll do this so that you guys can see what I'm talking about here. Just a couple of toothpicks, but always remember when you go to serve it, make sure that you remove the toothpicks, because you know, you don't want to hurt anybody. And sometimes when you bake something like this and it has a toothpick in it, that toothpick has a tendency to want to disappear on you, but you know it's in there, so you want to make sure that you always remove it. Again, I'm going to wash my hands. Okay, it's super important, guys. That's why I keep stressing it. So now I'm going to saute this. I can bake it like this, but you're not going to get a really pretty color on it. And by sauteing the chicken breast in a pan before you actually bake it, it's going to caramelize the outside of the chicken. And by caramelizing, I mean it's going to kind of bring out the sugars in the chicken, and it's going to make it brown, and kind of there's a little effect that happens, and it's called the Maillard reaction. But it's a scientific thing that kind of when all the sugars and the starches and everything in the chicken get heated up to a certain point, it becomes brown and it becomes really, really delicious. So sauteing it helps with flavor. So remember, when you're cooking things like this, I already mentioned seasoning is really important, and adding flavor in terms of sauteing something is really important as well, because you know, if I took this and just throw it in the oven like it was, it's going to taste really bland and kind of blah. you want to make sure that you give it as much flavor as you can by cooking it. So that's your job as a cook or a chef or whatever. So I'm going to use this little burner here that I have on my counter. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm using a nonstick pan. Nonstick pan works really well for this because you know, you don't want to be scraping this, you don't want it to stick. And I'm not looking to kind of make a sauce with this. I'm just looking to cook the chicken and make it nice and brown. Okay. So one thing that you really want to remember when you're sauteing anything, and we're going to, you know, anytime I do one of these demos for you guys, I'm going to keep reiterating this because it's really, really important. But when you're sauteing something in a pan like this, you always want to make sure that you get the pan hot before you even add your oil to the pan. So the rule of thumb is hot pan, cold oil. And I don't mean cold from the fridge. I just mean, you know, from the bottle. Okay. So I'm using olive oil here. You could use regular vegetable oil, canola oil. Butter is good, but when I use butter, I add a little butter and I add a little oil because I don't want the butter to burn. Butter burns very quickly because it has milk solids in it, so it burns really fast. So, you know, oil is really a good option for this because it cooks at a higher heat. How do I know that pan's hot enough? Because if I put my hand over the top of it, I can kind of feel the heat coming off of it. I'm going to add my oil to this, and I'm going to add a good deal of oil, like, you know, at least a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons of oil. Okay. And we're going to add all that to my pan. And then I'm going to let the oil get hot now, because what happens when you get the pan hot and you get the oil hot is I know the pan is nonstick, but if you get everything hot before you add your chicken to the pan, you are going to make this super nonstick. So the oil actually kind of creates a little bit of a barrier on top of the pan, and it will allow this to not stick even further. So I'm just going to put this in my pan, whole chicken breast. All right. Again, make sure you always wash your hands. I mean, if you're real finicky about it and you don't want to touch the chicken breast, get a pair of gloves, you know, some disposable gloves, and that will work as well too. So you know, that works absolutely perfectly. You don't have to worry about touching it, or you know, you still have to worry about cross-contamination. I have seen people cook with gloves on, and I have seen them think that their hand now, because it has a glove on, it can touch anything, and it can't, because once you touch the chicken, it's contaminated with the chicken. And so you should actually switch the gloves or wash your hands or whatever. You should not continue to touch your doorknobs or your pan or whatever. You should always make sure that your hands are absolutely clean. Okay. Once I add my chicken to the pan, I'm going to let it sit in there, maybe turn my heat down just a little bit. I don't want this to burn. And I'm just going to turn the heat down just a little bit because I don't want it really hot where it's going to really start burning. But once I add my food to my pan, I don't move it. Okay. I don't pick it up. I don't look at it. I don't start turning it. I let it sit for at least a minute or two, and I let it cook so that side that I put on the pan is actually going to become nice and crusty and cooked to a certain point. I mean, it's not cooked all the way through, but it has kind of a little crust on it. And then, you know, you'll see that even if you're doing this on a pan that is not nonstick, it will actually allow that chicken to release off the pan really easily. So that works really easily. So I'm going to take this chicken breast now, and we're going to flip it over. I have a beautiful brown color on the bottom of that. I think you guys can see that. Okay, so we're going to cook the other side now. By no means is this chicken completely cooked through. Okay, this would take in a saute pan at least, I'd say 15 minutes at a low heat in a saute pan. What we're going to do is we're going to transfer it to the oven, and the oven is going to roast it at a slower rate and get it cooked a little bit more evenly without the risk of it burning on either side. What we're going to do in the oven is actually roast it. Okay, and roasting is a cooking technique that if you are roasting something, typically if you roast something, you're roasting something that is really tender, that isn't a tough piece of meat. And when you roast it, you're basically cooking it at a high temperature for a short period of time, but yeah, until it kind of gets brown and it gets cooked at that point, okay? So now at this point, this is almost there. If I had like a really thick part here, I could pick this up with my tongs and just hold it there for a minute, so that would brown too. The browning is the thing that I want to accomplish with putting it on the saute pan like this. I want to make this nice and brown so that it gets really heated through and it's actually, you know, really delicious on the outside. Because as you take slices of that chicken, you're going to taste the outside with the inside, and it's all going to have a lot of flavor. Cooking is basically layering flavors on food, and that's your job to do by seasoning, by sauteing, by roasting, by doing all those kind of things, marinating or whatever. But that's all your job to do because you're the only one who can control that. Okay, so now this has got nice and brown. I'm going to transfer it to my baking sheet. Okay, and at this point, I can even, if I want to, I can even take out the toothpicks. I don't have to leave them in. We'll move our burner off to the side. I can remove these. Okay, because at this point, I really, you know, don't need to hold this together. Now it's going to hold on its own. Putting the toothpicks in is basically something you want to do when you are sauteing it so that it doesn't, you know, you don't lose it as you're turning it over and so forth. So now I have my oven at about 375 to 400. Your recipe says 350, and you can certainly do it at that temperature. This is a bigger chicken breast, and roasting it, you could go anywhere from 350 to 400 degrees, and that would be the temperature you could roast something in. Okay, so now at this point, this chicken breast is essentially ready to go in the oven. Make sure you preheat your oven so that everything, it's hot when you put it in. Okay, so now I'm going to take my chicken breast and through the magic of television. Oh, before I do that, I want to cover it at this point. Okay, and the reason that I'm going to cover it is because I want this to get nice and tender. If I roast this without a cover on at this point, the chicken can kind of dry out because I don't have a sauce or anything in there, and it can dry out and get really, really tough. So I always want to make sure that I started off by covering it and with, a piece of aluminum foil, whatever, whatever you want to use. So this goes in my oven covered. I have a piece here that I already made, and I want to show you guys how this looks. And we'll move this aside. So I've got my chicken breast now. It's absolutely beautiful. My broccoli is done at this point. And I know you probably wondered, the broccoli's uncooked, but in the amount of time it takes for you to roast the chicken breast, the broccoli is going to get done too. So you don't, especially if you're going to cut it into smaller pieces, you don't have to worry about the broccoli not being cooked. The only way that you're going to tell if your chicken is done, and I can tell you to keep that chicken breast in the oven for 20 minutes, but you saw the chicken breast that I used before. It's huge, and this one isn't quite as big. So the one that I just put in the oven is going to take a little more time than this one would. So the only way you're really going to tell is get yourself a cheap digital instant read thermometer. They're called instant read thermometers. They're very simple to use. And basically this one is a digital one, and I use it for lots of different things. But when you use something like this, you always want to go through the thickest part of the meat, and you want to go halfway through the chicken, okay? You don't want to go farther than halfway, because if you go farther than halfway, it's going to hit your pan, and the pan is going to be hot. So you want to go halfway through, and you want to look at the temperature. For chicken, it should never be under 165 to 170 degrees, okay? That is perfectly cooked chicken, 165 to 170. You do not want it any less than that, because you never want to eat pink chicken. That's not a good idea. So now I have my plate. We're going to take our chicken and we're going to plate this. So beautiful, and I think you guys can kind of see that stuffing. And I have a little bit of juice. I'm going to pour a little bit of that, cooking juice on top, just because it's going to give it, again, more flavor. And that's really, really important. Okay. So I have my chicken breast. I want to cut this open for you, and I want to show you what this looks like. So we'll cut this in half. It's perfectly cooked, and you have beautifully stuffed chicken breast. Super easy. It should take you 20 minutes or at 45 minutes from start to finish. One of the things I meant to tell you too when we started was that before you start cutting your chicken open, before you start doing anything like that, you saw that I had everything measured in bowls, on my cutting board, on my my tray. All the ingredients were there. That's what the French call mise en place. That's a very French technique, and basically it means everything in its place. So that when you are cooking your chicken, you're not out there looking for some mayonnaise. You're not out there looking for, some cheese or your spices. You can't find the garlic powder. Everything is there. When you go to make the chicken, all you need to do is, do what I did. You make the stuffing, you slit the chicken, you stuff it, and then you're good to go. It makes cooking a lot more enjoyable to have everything ready before you even start. Okay, so that, to me, that is probably one of the most important principles of cooking is mise en place. And you'll learn that too as you're going along. If maybe in the future, if we do a stir fry or something, especially those kind of things, because the cooking is so quick, you want to make sure that everything is ready. You're not out looking for soy sauce, or you're not out looking for some ingredient that you maybe don't even have. So, it's important to have it all in its place. So this is my stuffed chicken breast, guys. Real simple to make. And again, you can vary the cheese in it. You can do Swiss, you can do Monterey Jack, pepper jack if you wanted to. You could use frozen broccoli too. It doesn't have to be the fresh. You can use asparagus. So you can vary the ingredients as well. But the technique is basically the same for anything that you use as far as stuffing the chicken. So there you go, stuffed chicken breast. I hope you guys get a chance to try it, and then hopefully I'll see you soon.
And thank you once again, Mary, for that lovely presentation, and good luck to everybody who decides to enter this month's Bridgman Teen and Tween Cook-Off.